With a championship to its name, as well as 3 Premier's plates and 1 Australia Cup title, Melbourne City is one of the most decorated A-League men's clubs of all time. Founded in 2009 as Melbourne Heart before it's changed its name to Melbourne City in 2014 after it was bought by the City Football Group, Melbourne City is the most successful expansion team in A-League history. From 2020 to 2023, Melbourne City also appeared in 4 straight grand finals, winning 1 and losing the other 3. The likes of Connor Metcalf, Daniel Arzani, Nathaniel Atkinson, Dennis Shonru and Jordan Boss have all come through the Melbourne City Academy, with all going on to represent the Socceroos and secure moves to Europe. It currently has the likes of Matthew Leckie, Andrew Naboo, Azi Bajic and Marco Tilio on its books, having all been selected for Socceroos squads at the World Cup at one point in the past. Aaron Moy, Curtis Good, Bruno Fornaroli, Jamie McLaren, Harry Kuehl, Tim Cahill, David Villa, Damien Duff and Robert Corrin have all been on the City or Heart books at one stage, with each player bringing significant pedigree, whether that be for the Socceroos, the A-League or having featured at the highest level in Europe and at the World Cup. Yet despite all this, Melbourne City has struggled to attract crowds that it should be pulling, considering the pedigree of the club, that it's in the self-appointed sporting capital of the world, and the owners of the club are worth more than $5 billion, making it the richest club in the A-League. At the time of recording, Melbourne City has attracted just 56,556 fans to 9 home games during the 2024-25 A-League men's season. That's a whopping 25.97% drop off compared to the previous season, when City averaged 8,488 to its games. And if you don't include City's derby match with Melbourne Victory, this season's average drops to a measly 4,558. These are unprecedented numbers in the history of Heart or City. Why does it seem that nobody cares for Melbourne City? Well, that's what we're going to explore today. If you've seen some of the video essays I've done in the past, you'll know that I like to look at some history. I think it's crucial to do so if you want to get a clearer picture of what's going on at Melbourne City. Let's dive back to 2008, when the A-League was going through a rapid period of expansion, with Gold Coast United and North Queensland Fury having joined ahead of the 2009-10 season. After the success of Melbourne Victory, who was averaging close to 30,000 at games at the time, the FFA was keen to have another team in the Victorian capital. The second team was unable to join though for the first 5 seasons due to a 5-year exclusivity clause. If another Melbourne team was to join, it would have to be in the 2010-11 season. In September 2008, the Peter Sidwell-backed Melbourne Heart bid was awarded exclusive negotiating rights to be the A-League's 11th team, beating out the South Melbourne-backed Southern Cross FC bid. Sidwell's group was awarded the licence in June 2009 to join the A-League from the 2010-11 season. Sidwell and his partners essentially put up $1 million each to fund the $6 million in capital needed, though the club was frugal in its approach and was determined not to suffer budget blowouts like other clubs at the time. It was also determined to bring in an overseas coach. Ange Postecoglou was interviewed, but the future Tottenham Hotspur manager turned it down, and Dutchman John Van Schip ultimately got the job. It was during a time when playing the Dutch way was reasonably popular in Australia, with Gus Hinnink and Pim Verbeek both serving as Socceroos coaches around that time. The appeal of a second team in Melbourne would also bring the A-League's first proper derby. Sorry Central Coast and Newcastle fans, if you have to drive for an hour to get to each place, it's hard to consider it a proper local derby. But the problem the Heart faced was that it didn't have a clear identity. Victory had dominated the Melbourne market for close to 5 years, pulling crowds that old NSL clubs could only dream of. If fans hadn't latched themselves to Victory, there weren't many left over for Heart. Unlike the failed Sydney Rovers bid and the future Western Sydney Wanderers team, the Heart did not clearly attach itself to a particular market, community, or suburbs in Melbourne. Instead, it was based out of the newly built Melbourne Rectangular Stadium. It would share that venue with Victory, who was still playing quite a few games at Docklands, less than a 4-kilometre walk away. The Heart would also be kitted out in red and white, and they were essentially the We're Not Victory club. The first 4 years for the Heart weren't particularly thrilling. After playing in the playoffs in its second season, the Heart slumped down the ladder, finishing second last and last in the next 2 seasons respectively, Rarely did the club attract a crowd over 10,000 fans, outside of Melbourne derbies of course, with Heart managing that feat only just 4 times in the first 4 seasons. The woes of Heart weren't helped when South Melbourne, who missed out on joining the A-League 2 Heart, attempted twice to buy a stake in the club in 2013. Both bids were rejected. This came after whispers in the press that the Heart was set to face the X because of poor crowds and a lack of identity. But it seemed there was never an actual proper threat of the Heart being pulled. More of a media beat-up. At the time, when North Queensland Fury and Gold Coast United had failed so spectacular, Heart seemed like the next easy punching bag. But unlike North Queensland and Gold Coast, Heart's financial backers were fairly stable. In terms of crowds, the Heart averaged 9,082 during the 2011-12 season, bigger than any other Melbourne club had ever achieved in the near 30-year history of the NSL, which was full of history, culture and identity. The things Heart had allegedly lacked. Sure, the derbies boosted Heart's figures, but the NSL had their derbies too. In January 2013, then Melbourne City director Simon Pearce caught up with the FFA chairman Frank Lowy. During their 20-minute conversation at a private New York City jet terminal, Pearce told Lowy that Manchester City would be interested in investing in an Australian site in either Sydney or Melbourne. Of course, Lowy's first suggestion was Sydney FC, a club he was once a part owner of. Pearce met with Sydney FC club chairman Scott Barlow, but Barlow said his family were not interested in selling, but that a fee of $25 million might convince them to change their minds. Pearce would only consider the idea if Sydney FC was willing to throw open its books and allow Manchester City to undertake due diligence. Barlow said no, and Pearce ended the meeting by telling the Sydney FC chairman he would do some benchmarking analysis of the rest of the A-League. If he found that the $25 million price was fair, he would initiate further discussions. Sydney FC was not seriously considered again. Then over a coffee with New Zealand entrepreneur Bart Campbell in Sydney in the final months of 2013, Pearce learned that the Melbourne Heart was reputedly up for sale. Campbell was the chairman of sports marketing and management company TLA Worldwide, and then chief operating officer of CSM Sport and Entertainment. The consortium had just bought the Melbourne Storm from News Limited. Campbell also broached the idea of City holding a minority stake in Melbourne Heart if it was to be sold. Pearce gave Campbell permission to investigate whether Heart might be a realistic proposition for City, but swore him to secrecy. If word got out, millions of dollars might suddenly be added to the price tag. In subsequent meetings, Heart chairman Peter Sidwell learned that Campbell's other Storm consortium members were also part of his prospective bid for Heart. But at the time though, he did not know Manchester City was involved. Talks accelerated throughout December and early January, by which time Campbell was able to strike a deal with Sidwell and his fellow Heart owners for $11.25 million. Manchester City was to take an 80% stake, with Campbell and his 3 fellow investors, Caravans manager Jerry Ryan, bookmaker Matt Tripp, and Kiwi businessman Michael Watt, taking the remainder 20%. It was a last-minute flip by the Abu Dhabi owners to own the majority of the club. The fee still represented a fantastic price for the Heart owners, who had put up $5 million when the FFA granted them the A-League's second amend licence. They were also on the way to having to fund a $1.5 million shortfall in the Heart's operations for the 2013-14 season. The owners had run a frugal outfit during the Heart's 4 years in operation, with fees garnered from transfers to young players such as Eli Babal and Arzi Bage helping cover financial losses. Manchester City hadn't exactly bought the cream of the A-League, with the Heart going winless in its first 14 matches. The team won its first game the weekend before the team was sold, a 3-1 win over Newcastle during the 2013-14 season. In its final season under the Heart banner, the club ultimately finished last and won the notorious wooden spoon. But in the off-season, City then moved to bring its Melbourne brand in line with other investments, changing the team name to Melbourne City. It attempted to change the team colours from red and white stripes to sky blue, but the A-League's original sky blue team, Sydney FC, objected strongly, in true Collingwood Magpies style. But in not true Collingwood Magpies style, the FFA upheld the decision. The newly born Melbourne City club compromised by announcing a revised colour scheme. It would play in a predominantly white kit with a sky blue strip at home, and in the old Heart kit during away matches. The decision to rebrand not only the strip but the club logo ostracised a number of supporters at the club. Not only the change in identity but also the controversial ownership. For fans of other Premier League clubs, they felt alienated supporting a club backed by Manchester City. a rival of their own English club. And City Football Group was also majorly backed by the Abu Dhabi United Group, with United Arab Emirates having a poor human rights record raising concerns about sports washing. Despite the off-field concerns, CFG went to work transforming its new Melbourne club. Ex-Premier League players Damien Duff and Robert Corrin were brought in, and so was PSV Eindhoven Ajax centre-back Rob Velvaart. But the main man brought in was Spanish World Cup winner David Villa, who was signed on a 10-game loan from sister club New York City. Villa would score 2 goals in what ultimately became a 4-game loan. City also tried to recruit Chelsea legend Frank Lampard on loan from New York City too, but he ultimately went to Manchester City. Despite a few fans being disgruntled with the changes, there was a wave of optimism and excitement around the newly rebranded Heart. With Villa coming in and Tim Cahill joining a few seasons later, the old Heart fans were dreaming of big things. City's first home game under the new regime was against Newcastle Jets on October 19, 2014. Played in front of 15,717 fans at the Melbourne Rectangular Stadium, City drew 1-1 with David Villa scoring a late equaliser. His second consecutive match scoring after he scored a goal in the opening round against Sydney FC. That attendance remains a record regular season home attendance for City outside of games against Melbourne Victory. City went on to finish the season in 5th, its best finish at the time, and after beating Wellington in the first week of the finals, it set up a mouth-watering Melbourne derby. The winner would progress to the grand final. And so, in front of 50,873 fans, Victory pumped City 3-0. There had been major improvements in the space of a year, but there was still a long way to go for City. During the club's second season, Bruno Fornaroli was recruited from Uruguay, with the talismanic striker scoring 28 goals in all competitions during the 2015-16 season. City rose to 4th on the ladder, but once again missed out on the grand final. But during the 2016-17 season, City won its first trophy, the Australia Cup. In front of 18,751 fans, City defeated Sydney FC 1-0 thanks to a goal from Socceroos' all-time goal scorer, Tim Cahill. That crowd remains a record attendance for an Australia Cup final. There was another 4th place finish, but no final once again. By the end of City's 4th season under City Football Group ownership, the club finished 3rd on the ladder, but the club was denied a spot in the grand final after losing to Newcastle Jets in the semi-final, with Riley McGree scoring that sensational Scorpion goal. In those first 4 seasons under City Football Group, City pulled more than 10,000 fans to a game on 11 occasions, not including the Melbourne Derby. That was in stark contrast to Heart, who only managed it 4 times in as many seasons. But City has only gone on to hit that milestone twice since then, against Sydney FC during the 2018-19 season and against Western United in the opening round of 23-24. After a disappointing 5th place finish in the 2018-19 season, City's fortunes really started to change for the better, at least on the pitch. A 2nd place finish during the COVID-19 interrupted 2019-20 season signalled the club's best ever finish at the time, and City qualified for its first grand final. And despite losing to a Ryan Grant goal scored off his nipple, there seemed like City could continue to improve. What followed was 3 straight Premier's plates, as well as a championship. City bounced back to thump Sydney FC 3-1 in the grand final. Unfortunately, a defeat to crosstown rivals Western United followed in 22, before an embarrassing 6-1 defeat to the Central Coast Mariners in 23. That grand final should have been played at Melbourne under different circumstances had it not been for Danny Townsend's brain fart of a decision. But would City have won that match if it was in Melbourne? I'm not entirely sure. I guess we'll never know. Since City's run of 4 straight grand finals, the club crashed in the 23-24 season and finished 6th, its worst placing since the CFG takeover. So knowing all this, why does no one care about Melbourne City? Well, of course, some people do, but we can be a little bit hyperbolic to get our point across. While Hearts started strong enough, crowds dropped off quickly. The City Football Group provided a lot of hope and dreams, and crowds improved drastically, but success took longer than expected. We can't also ignore the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Melbourne was decimated by the pandemic, and Melbourne Victory has also struggled since as well, combined with the disaster of the Bucketgate Derby. But then, all clubs struggled through the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as all clubs feeling the fallout from the grand final decision. In all honesty, I don't think the original licence should have gone to Heart in the first place. It should have gone to the South Melbourne-backed bid instead. Victory were a behemoth at the time, and pairing the club with an old NSL heavyweight would have made a much more enthralling Melbourne derby. The We're Not Victory identity Hart played into a bit during the early days was actually a fairly decent marketing tool. Despite Victory's big crowds and early success, we live in a small poppy syndrome country. It's easy to hate teams that are doing well, but that's not going to help a club survive long term. The big thing that I think is killing City is a clear lack of identity. Despite being based out of Casey in Melbourne's southeast, City still plays games at the Melbourne Rectangular Stadium in Melbourne CBD, which it shares with Melbourne Victory. It's clear that Victory is the biggest team in Melbourne. City isn't. That's okay. In leagues all across the world, there are big teams and there are small teams. Despite its backers, City is a small team at this point in time. While all of its academy teams and A-League women's teams are playing out at Casey, CFG should explore a permanent move out there for its senior men's team, but it doesn't seem likely in the near future. At a fan forum back in February 2025, City representatives said the club is currently in negotiation to extend the lease at the Melbourne Rectangular Stadium for the long term and have no intention to move games away. This is despite City's Director of Football, Michael Petrillo, saying in the same forum that the stadium size in Australia should be between 10 to 15,000, and it does kill the atmosphere when clubs are playing out of stadiums that are too big. Yet the club is still going to be committed to playing in a 30,000-seater stadium it can't fill. At the forum, it also said a number of ticket deals and giveaways are just not working. A really concerning thing revealed in the fan forum was that Petrillo said City didn't have any money to bring players in during the January transfer window. It's clear that City Football Group, reminding you that this group is worth over $5 billion, just doesn't care about its Melbourne experiment anymore. So they won't be funding a new stadium in the southeast, nor will they be bringing in a David Villa-like marquee for the foreseeable future. Yet it's not like CFG only cares about Manchester City. New York City FC is expected to pay the full $780 million in construction costs at the new Etihad Park in Queens, one of the most expensive places to build in the world. If CFG wanted a stadium in the southeast of Melbourne, they could easily afford it. They just clearly don't see the value in it. And why build a brand new stadium when there's a perfectly fine taxpayer-funded stadium they can just rent? But what happens if CFG one day decides to pull all funding from Melbourne City? The future would look exceptionally grim. I truly believe that interest can peak once again at Melbourne City if it is to base itself full-time in the southeast of Melbourne. I think despite, the promises of building their own stadium kind of falling short at the moment, Western United is probably an ideal model for Melbourne City to follow. They're based in the west, they're building their facilities in the west of Melbourne, and they're trying to engage the broader western suburbs of Melbourne. They knew that when they were bidding for the competition, because they knew Melbourne Victory was so ingrained in the middle of Melbourne that Western United had to engage a different area. Melbourne City isn't doing that. That's what's holding them back. They really need to sort out their identity issues. That concludes today's video. Thank you once again for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't already, why not hit that subscribe button and like the video? It's completely free and helps grow the channel. We also have channel memberships. That's a way you can financially support us, but there's no pressure to do so. But any support will help grow the quality of our videos and will help us put out more video essays like this. We'll see you in the next video.